So, in what ways do you understand the life and vision of Dr. Paulos Mar Gregorios?
See, the way I see Dr. Paulos Mar in his life, I see it as a mission, The way he basically, I'm basically trying to contextualize it in the way he approached the national capital and his entry into the national capital, and then looking at it broadly in a context in which his approach to Christian leadership provided, in my opinion, a very deep theological understanding. So, what came out from Paulos Mar Gregorios' mission, I think, was his broad vision to combine all the denominational churches, the kind of ecumenical approach which he brought in. I think for me that was fascinating. Secondly, was his deep understanding of orthodoxy. When he engaged in a mission to connect to all the churches, while doing that, he was deeply aware and completely mindful of the tenets and the underlying conventions and customs and articles of faith of the Orthodox Church. So he remained true at all times to the deep, the deep philosophical moorings of orthodoxy. But having that as a substratum, he further built from orthodoxy as a foundational cornerstone and then started expanding his vision by embracing all denominations. And therein lay, I think, his secret of leadership, to basically create a consensus, to be broadly humanitarian, and then to combine within that a broad, to kind of bring in his spirit into that, suffusing the whole thing with something which is his unique signature. I think that is for me fascinating, the story of the growth of our nation, the expansion of our national capital, and to be here during the times of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi onwards, being a part of India's political history and bringing his own kind of cultural addition to India's socio-economic political history and the history of the national capital, and building these churches here, bringing the communities together, having friends and people like the Dalai Lama, and bringing in this beautiful kind of a leadership which we should all aspire to, and see how beautifully he brought in all these factors together. That, I think, for me is a unique message from Paulos Mar Gregorios, the vision of his leadership and the ability to take people, all people of all faiths together. I think that is something which I think is marvelous, Ajay.
Mar Gregorios says, the combination of justice, love, knowledge, wisdom, and power, freedom. It is the essence of God. And we humans must grow into this power of being. And most importantly, law must assist in this process. How well can the law and order help us achieve these ideal combinations of justice, love, knowledge, wisdom, and power, freedom?
So that is a brilliant question. I mean, you framed it so beautifully. It's by itself a symposium topic, but let me try to address it, Ajay. See, I think when we look at love and justice, I think both those words are so powerful. Justice, for me as a lawyer, is something which we kind of fight for, and we believe that access to justice is one of the most important things which is available. But I think when we look at love and justice together, I think that combination is extremely powerful, because I think that goes back to also the concept of philosopher kings, which the Greek scholars spoke about. Because ultimately, a philosopher and a combination of a philosopher and a king is both power and knowledge. I mean, connecting again back to knowledge and wisdom, which Acharya was speaking about, and power and freedom, and then of course love and justice. I think in all these terms, the most powerful factor probably could be love, because I think ultimately that's what makes the world go round. If you have a kind of unconditional love for your fellow beings, I know it sounds very utopian, but that unconditional love can actually lead to I think, a proper, effective administration of justice, where justice itself becomes by itself an end. You're through the means of love, you reach ultimately the end, which is justice. If there is justice, I think the corollary is also that you would automatically have a certain element of love, because you feel from within that there is an underlying sense of right, that righteousness which comes in, I think gives you the power of moral conviction. And that moral conviction ultimately, in my opinion, may translate towards some kind of justice, in the sense that you have that underlying moral compass which prevents you from not doing something which could be blatantly wrong. That is one part of the thing. The second, Acha, when it comes to wisdom and knowledge, I think that also is a huge, what should I say, those two terms are so powerful again. But if I may look at it, and the way I see today in our information age, what we are bombarded with is actually information. Today, what we have is access to a continuous live stream of information in multiple forms, which kind of has taken over our lives. So we are bombarded with information. We do not know how to distinguish good information from bad. We are just getting information. We don't have the time to process it. This raw data kind of comes in and it kind of overwhelms us. Now, from information to process it to knowledge, and from knowledge to wisdom, and then to ultimately get some insights out of that, I think that process is by itself a long step. So I think when it comes to these questions, knowledge and wisdom, I think knowledge and wisdom also to that extent has to be in some sense divine, in the sense that there has to be an element of divinity. I know again it's utopian, but that element of divinity or that feeling of being guided by the divine, I think also helps in taking the leap of faith, in understanding concepts which are beyond normal human comprehension. So what information is there and the knowledge which we process out of that, at times I've seen that some of the concepts are so deep that belief itself gets a little shaken up. So that leap of faith, I think, can only come from a underlying awakening or some kind of a consciousness which is deeper than the self. That kind of consciousness, I think, ultimately translates towards wisdom, and at least in the life of Buddha, we have seen a kind of enlightenment where you transcend. It's so transcendental. You kind of transform yourself from where you stood to a level which is absolutely saintly, or a level which takes you from being an ordinary human being to a Mahatma in that sense. Paulos Mar Gregorios' life, I think, is transformative in the sense of being born to a family in Kerala and the path he walked. Essentially, through the milestone questions which you put in just now, I think you can see the life of Paulos Mar Gregorios, the transformative system which happened, and how he transforms himself into a person who ultimately was so enlightened that you could see it in his very aura. His very aura, when I have had the occasion to meet him when I was much more younger, as a student in school and a student in college. He had that love for the children, he had the deep affection. And he, by then, I think he was in his 70s, I'm assuming, he had that aura which goes with a certain level of, if I may use the word, greatness. It's something which you cannot cultivate overnight. It has to come from experience lived over many decades of extremely strenuous thinking and hard work. So that kind of aura was visible and it manifested in his very personality. So again, going back to power and freedom, I'll again connect it back to there to say that to be free ultimately is also enlightenment. It has to be a higher consciousness, because to be free would mean that we are free from all kinds of biases, all kinds of underlying prejudices. And again, goes back to love. You have to have unconditional love to basically subtract all your biases, to reduce your prejudices, and then to be ultimately free of all kinds of stereotypes is the ultimate endeavour in human journey. And I think Paulos Mar Gregorios ultimately walked that path towards enlightenment. That is the way I see it. Of course, it is his journey. Every man has his personal journey, but his journey, the spiritual journey which was there, is a guiding lamppost for all of us. I think it's a great milestone. At least we can all be guided. And when we look back, we know that there were giants among men. And he was certainly one of them.
Writing an article, the theme of that article was, or the topic was, law in a revolutionary age. So he refers to two Catholic theologians, or the stalwarts of Western thought, namely Saint Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas. So he says, for Augustine, if the man was not sinful, they would be guided by love, needing no laws. And on the other hand, Saint Thomas Aquinas' ideas, he says, there must be law regulation even in the innocent society. which is related to the thought of Aristotle too. So, how can we better understand the equilibrium of love and law in maintaining a harmonious and just society?
I think that's again a very fascinating question. Achha, the way I see it, I would also maybe distinguish between Western legal thought or Western philosophy and Eastern legal thought. For example, in India, we have the Manu Shastras or the Manusmriti. The Manusmriti again is considered in Indian philosophical thinking to be the fountainhead of knowledge. In our society, or when you look at the Indian philosophical traditions of Advaita onwards, or if you look at the way the Hindu philosophy has developed, the Vedic philosophy, you will see again that ultimately it goes back to dharma and karma, a combination of good dharma and of good karma. So you have to ultimately keep on doing what is the belief system is that in the Kali Yuga, you have to be a karma yogi. So when everything around you is collapsing, when things are bad, when things are not going well, you still continue to wake up every morning and you continue to do your work irrespective of what rewards are there for you. You continue to do your work, you continue to deliver high quality work, and you're not bothered about what the outcome is. That is the true karma yogi in this Kali Yuga. The dharma system ultimately is the moral code of conduct which governs us all. And in India, whether it was Hinduism, whether it was Buddhism, ultimately the Dharma Shastras or the guiding dharmic principles of being good ultimately is a part of our culture here as well. You know, the fight of good over evil, symbolized in multiple Hindu festivals, symbolized in multiple lives of our own saints in Christianity, including our saints or people who have lived that kind of life from India, who have combined the local and the Indian traditions along with the traditions of deep Christian theology. That combination is visible to all of us. When we look at St. Thomas Aquinas and when we look at Augustine, St. Augustine, I think both of them, their theory again goes back to the existence of law. Whether law predates the entry of man, when men and women start living together in societies, when we moved away from the nomadic times, from being merely hunters to being gatherers and then towards a pastoral, agricultural, sedentary existence. Law starts to march in tandem with that. So the man who was a nomad, his legal system, I'm assuming, or I would presume that it is deeply primitive. So you have a primitive form of justice which would have started off. That primitive system of justice then starts to improve itself as mankind marches towards what can be assumed to be towards progress. So when we first are walking on all fours, and before we start walking on two legs, law started on four legs and law also started walking on two legs. It became more sophisticated, it became nuanced. In Egypt, you had the Hammurabi's code. The Hammurabi code was considered to be a very strict code of implementation. You have the Romanic law, predating to that extent the Anglo-Saxon codes. The Romanic law at the end of the day evolves out of the Justinian codes, where the Roman civilization was built, the Pax Romanica, one of the longest surviving civilizations in the world as we know today, which survived in Western Roman civilization for a long time, as well as a much more longer time in the eastern part of the world, around Greek and Turkey and what we consider to be then the Byzantine Empire, before the Ottoman Empire comes in, is fundamentally a Romanic system of laws which underpin civilization. So the Roman law ultimately, which today translates into the civil law system as we understand today, used by and large in European countries, essentially is a legal system which marches hand in hand from the Dark Ages through the Renaissance into Western Reformation, and thereafter you see the Industrial Revolution. You see the growth of law. So you see laws fundamentally governing human affairs, changing towards corporate laws, towards commercial laws as mankind marches forwards and or accumulates capital. Then you see the legal system follow. But then again you see a legal clash, because again, taking a leaf from what St. Thomas Aquinas said about the existence of laws and regulations, communist ideologies or ideologies which came in later, you see there's a different system of justice which is there, where principles of natural justice are assumed to be in one particular community, which is the communes are being run by leaders of the Communist Party, which was there in Russia, which was there in China, which was there in North Korea, which was by and large visible in places like Cuba, where there was no Montesquieuan theory of separation of powers between the parliament, the political executive and the judiciary. That kind of difference wasn't there. So there you'll see the Communist Party had a combined system of justice. India, we have a different system of justice. But going back ultimately to love and law, ultimately again goes back to enlightenment. Because unless you have enlightened leadership, which is deep and magnanimous and very profound, going back again to the philosopher king. So if you have the philosopher king as your template, then I think the theories of, St. Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle, because Aristotelian theory also is fascinating, because Aristotle at the end of the day was capable of developing law through deliberation, through discussion, through debate, through oratory, through rhetoric. That was the Greek model. The Greek model was the free and fair exchange of ideas between men. When I say man, I mean man and woman. It is a free and fair exchange. And of course, societies those days, where the kind of gender equality we see today, of course, wasn't there. But the fundamental exchange of ideas ultimately culminates or moves towards a rapid, development of law. And the Greek theology or the Greek legal system is again reflected in the Romanic system and substantially borrows from the English common law system. By the time Lord Coke, Lord Blackstone and the others start writing the code after the Magna Carta in UK, you see a rapid transformation where even the king, who was supposed to have a divine right to rule, even the king is subsumed under parliamentary sovereignty. So the parliament becomes more supreme. It's lex suprema of the parliament. Parliament becomes supreme, and you can see that the king, to that extent, is kind of brought to a level where it is first among equals, perhaps. So there is an ornamental role the king enjoys, but the parliament to that extent becomes one of the most powerful deliberative bodies in the United Kingdom or in Britain, as we understand. The same concepts are borrowed in the American Revolution. After the American Revolution, when the American Constitution was written, the American Constitution borrows substantially from the same theme. You will see that the same thing in the French Revolution. The revolutionary ideas of law, when we discuss, when the question itself is directed towards that, you see liberty, equality and fraternity. The war cry of the French Revolution, reflected broadly in every constitution, including our constitution, part 3 of India's fundamental rights. You will see Article 14, which guarantees equal protection of laws and equality of law in Article 14, 15, 16, which deals with public-related employment and opportunity for mankind. Article 21, considered to be a very powerful article which guarantees the right to life and personal liberty. 24, 25, 26 dealing with the right of religious institutions. Article 30 dealing with the right to establish and administer minority education institutions. Article 19, which includes your freedom of speech and expression, your right to trade, your right to livelihood, your right to move around, which is all carved out or only exempted through reasonable restrictions. You see the way any army operates in the world or any of the armed forces. It's regimented, your shoe is polished, your clothes are pressed, your health and hygiene is taken care of. Regimentation gives the human mind a certain level of comfort. It's an antidote to depression, keeps you going because you have targets to meet. But going back again to the question of discipline, essentially I think the family, which Acha you pointed out, the family, the society, our country, our community, I have always believed that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Now that hand, your maternal hand, your mother who gives birth to you, who goes through all the labor pains and brings you into the world and then takes you a part of her and starts educating you, probably from the womb itself, where her discipline becomes a part of your discipline. Her ideology, her culture is knowingly or unknowingly being transferred to you. From that point on, you have the process of disciplining starting out. Disciplining in the sense that kind of thinking which suffuses your spirit. So the family, for me, I would always believe, starting with the mother. I'm not saying the father's role is less. Father has an equally strong role, but the mother's role is deeply affectionate. It goes back to maternal love. A mother's love becomes far more deeper. A father's love is, I'm not reducing a father's love to a diminishing point, but therein lies your first steps towards your discipline. When you're being corrected, you are rebelling, you are not happy, but those lessons are being learned. When you're being told by your mother, Mana, don't do this, it's wrong. You may not like it, but that is where the process starts. Your father gives you, scolding, saying it is wrong. You may not like it, but again, you are being told what are the boundaries in which you can behave well. It could be Simple things like, behaving in a certain manner. It could be greater things like showing respect to your elders. It could be simple things, the details in life which differentiate you as you grow up as a man, which will make you a cut above the rest, starts off from home. And that kind of discipline, I think, ultimately, when it comes to Christianity or into Christian thinking, that matter for any religion, the thinking process, I think every religion has is truth as an underlying discipline. I mean, it is truthfulness which governs the affairs of man. And that truthfulness, I think every religion not only expounds it, every religion is very categorical when it comes to the fact that it stands on truth. The untruth which may come out later, subject to interpretations of men and mankind later, that could be a challenge, creating indiscipline. But the religion per se will always remain stable, constant, and truthful. So I think whether it is a moral code in Christianity, whether it is a moral code in Buddhism or Hinduism or even Confucianism, any kind of organized thought process, it goes back to fundamental respect. And I one incident I will share with you, Ajay, is, I was many years back, I had an opportunity to travel to Japan and China on different occasions. I was fascinated with the respect they gave for their elders. In Chinese society, for instance, I could see that they moved most of the time with people who were older to them. Their elders were never abandoned. They would be in a wheelchair, they would be sitting there. There was this whole love and affection which went on, which showed that there was an intergenerational blessing, from grandfather to father, from father to son, from son to grandson. 3-4 generations sitting together. In Japan, what I noticed again is they are highly disciplined, but extremely grateful. Always grateful for what life had to offer. You open a door for them, you would see him bow down and in a very respectful way acknowledge the fact that you have made life easier for him. And that again, in Asiatic societies, especially Far Eastern societies, you can see the discipline which is there and does not reduce the love. They have their love in place, but they have their discipline in place as well. But value systems marches hand in hand with discipline. So it is not merely discipline in terms of a authoritarian kind of a system where you're being asked by a system of command to do 1, 2, 3, 4. It is something where it is more bilateral or even multilateral amongst members who belong to a society. And that kind of discipline is what our nation, for example, can go further ahead and march miles ahead. Our churches, for instance, infused with the discipline not only amongst the laity, but also amongst the men of the cloth who sit in positions of leadership. Therein lies the message of Paulos Mar, because that shows that spiritual leadership can always remain strong, loving, but also demand its discipline. So to that extent, I think discipline has to be seen from the unit of the family, and from family it has to be built upwards, so that the man, the son, the daughter becomes a powerful force catalyst for progress in their own society or their community or wherever in the world they travel to. They become ambassadors for their family and for their nations.
For Christians, it is the life of Jesus Christ we take as model and as a source of outlook. Especially his statement, the statement of Jesus Christ, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the thing that is for God. This is one perspective of how a church must deal with or perceive and respect the law of the land and also its regulations. So what are your thoughts about it?
See, when, again, Najab, this is a question which is so contemporary in terms of its usefulness and the way it needs to be understood, in my opinion, by people across all religious divides. The fundamental question again is this: in a nation state, where do you stand and where do you situate your multiple identities? You may belong to a religious group, you may belong to a caste group, you may have your own clan, you may have your own powerful tribal communities. But in my opinion, the nationalist streak or the nationalism is an overriding factor which is common to all members of society. So every member of society ultimately, in my opinion, comes under, for us at least in India, under the Indian Constitution, which gives you your rights and freedoms. That is a realm where your nationality and your position as a citizen in the nation state takes precedence over everything else, because that is where you are situated. You may be a Chinese Buddhist, you may be a Chinese Christian, you may be a Confucian thinker, but the Chinese nation state becomes for that member the paramount membership which guides his life. Into that comes in your respective philosophical systems, your religious moorings. Now, when you look at the life of Jesus Christ, Lord Jesus Christ, and when you look at the fact that as a Palestinian Jew who belonged to the Romanic civilization, which we spoke about earlier, so the broader context is the Roman civilization. Within the Roman civilization, you have literally Palestinians, I mean, in the sense you have Jewish enclaves, you have Greek enclaves, you may have Turkish enclaves, Germanic enclaves. At that time, they were governed by the Romans. And the underlying code, if you notice, is the Justinian code. Because you have even Pontius Pilate washing his hands. So there was a trial. It was not that there was no trial. So there was some system of justice where there was an adjudication. And when the communities came and said he has to be killed, there still was a trial. But Pontius Pilate very symbolically washes his hands because he believed the justice was not done. He said, it is now up to you. This sin is for you, yours to bear. I wash my hands. So when you look at the life of Christ, Christ starts off in that particular Mediterranean region where all great civilizations kind of started and ended. You will see that he was being put into a kind of a very cumbersome kind of a very, very difficult kind of a slippery slope question, asking him to make an either or choice. If you choose one side, you would definitely have multiple problems will arise out of that. If you raise the other question, you would still have. So it was a kind of a black and white question. The beauty of Christ's answer, I think, is one of the deepest philosophical answers anybody could have given, because it combines an answer which again is built on respect and love. He simply says that what is deserved by Caesar is for Caesar, and what is for the church is for the church. He did not say that this is for the church or this is for Caesar. What each man deserves or what each system deserved, you please give it. I think for us the lesson is whatever and whichever system or political system you live under, you have to have fundamental respect for the system you're in. You may be in some of the toughest places in the world. You may be an Orthodox Syrian Christian from Kottayam, working in some of the toughest regions of Africa. You will have to abide by the system which exists there. You cannot say that, no, I will have my own system. If they have their system, you have to abide by that. You may be working very hard in some of the greatest or the most toughest of theocracies in the world. You may be in a nation which primarily is governed by a different religious system. But your respect for that nation state is your fundamental, in my opinion, your fundamental duty. But every nation, at least we are fortunate to live in a nation where ultimately the Constitution guarantees your right to freedom. So as long as your freedom does not become a burden for your neighbor, you're free to practice it. As long as your religion is walking the straight path without creating difficulties for anyone, is not a morality hazard, is not a public health hazard, does not affect public order, you are safe and you're free to practice your own religion. We have numerous cults in our country who espouse their own religions. Nobody is affected by them as long as they don't do anything which affects the statutory criminal statutes or the law of the land. So therein lies the answer to these questions. At the end of the day, what belongs to Caesar is for Caesar, and what belongs to the church is for the church. And he said that in a time when the Romanic civilization was extremely, extremely overarching and one of the most powerful civilizations. But the Roman civilization allowed everybody their own freedoms. They never said that now all the Jews of this particular Mediterranean region should now assume the Romanic religious systems or our pagan belief systems. The Jews were practiced the way they were practicing. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were having their debates in the Jewish synagogues. Nobody stopped them. Their rituals were free. But the problem would be when the Jewish community labeled him as a revolutionary or a political revolutionary who is there to destabilize the Roman governance system. That was the illegality they tried to put on Lord Jesus Christ. And that is where the trial went in a manner in which the Roman governor was forced to become involved. He did not get involved for the religious disputes within the Jewish faith. The Judaic traditions did not affect him. What affected the Roman governor was a charge being brought in that here was a man who was there to destabilize the political system and was directly challenged.
Be it for a nation and a church, as you rightly said, it provides a fundamental framework to exercise our freedom and responsibilities in the society. So how relevant Constitution is relevant and will be relevant forever, but in the coming time it will be very much challenged. So how relevant will be the Constitution, especially in a democratic setup?
See, Ajay, I think as a lawyer, especially as a lawyer who does a lot of constitutional law practice, or trying to be in matters or doing matters which interprets constitutional provisions, I think, at least in our country, the Constitution is extremely robust. The robustness of the Constitution does not come merely from the printed word. It has come in because of the way the Constitution has been interpreted, not only by the Honorable Supreme Court, but all our 28 High Courts. Every day, a writ petition which is filed in a High Court in all our 28 states has constitutional questions of personal liberty, of right to equality, of denial of, say, a gentleman who belongs to the other backward classes, or an SC/ST person who has been denied his job, or his daughter who's being denied an admission in a college, or a priest who believes that his religious freedom has been affected, or he's been wrongly implicated, or an education institution which claims a linguistic minority status. It could be a Kannada school in Delhi, or it could be a Bengali school in Madras, or it could be a Muslim community under the Waqf board agitating for their rights. So every day in the 28 High Courts and in the Honorable Supreme Court of India, every day common man is fighting for justice. And it's a narrative being written not now, it's a narrative which started from 1950. From 1950 onwards, as long as the constitutional courts became active in India, and subsequently numerous high courts, there has been a battle for fundamental freedoms every day. And this is an exercise which is very familiar to a judicial officer or to a practicing lawyer who sees this as an everyday law in motion. So when we look at ourselves as members of the judicial fraternity, or as members of the legal fraternity, or as practicing advocates, Constitution for us is an everyday blueprint, right? It is not far removed from reality. We engage with it on an everyday basis. Judges of the Honorable Supreme Court, the Honorable High Courts, they engage with it on a minute-by-minute basis, I could say, or at least an hourly basis in multiple forms. And they interpret and they write their judgments, often running into very complex questions. So these judgments become the law of the land. And every day the Constitution gets reinforced with these interpretations. They strike down law which is inconsistent with the Constitution, what we lawyers call, if it is ultra vires, the Constitution, they're struck down as being bad law. Sometimes they're interpreted, sometimes they're read down, sometimes they're read in conjunction. But the interpretation of the Constitution is an everyday exercise. And when you look at the Constitution's, the Constituent Assembly debates, you can see the pioneering role of B.R. Ambedkar, right? You can look at the Constitution, the way the debates happen. The debates did not happen overnight. This is a legacy of the nation, where I think one of the so-called members of the most oppressed communities, B.R. Ambedkar, rose from the bottom and then came out with a living document which had community members from every faith, multiple strands of Hindu faith, from Brahmins from Tamil Nadu, or maybe from Andhra Pradesh, to from Uttar Pradesh, to all kinds of people, whether they were Kais, they were Baniyas, they were Rajputs, they could be from the Vaishya community, they could be maybe Christian community members from different parts, Anglo-Indian community members. This is a combination, a microcosm of the country which existed at that time. And the Constitution is built on that. The abiding values of the founding fathers, that was crystallized the way it's crystallized in the United States, the American Constitution, or the way it is crystallized in the concepts of the French Revolution. These things today have become the lifeblood of this nation. So any kind of an interference in the way I see it, that is going to strike against a massive body of work. So every nation goes through challenges. But in my opinion, you could have a phase which goes on for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. But every phase has a cycle. Because ultimately truth alone will triumph. Satyameva Jayate is what our motto is. So if there is a truth, that alone will ultimately triumph. Indian Constitution is built on the ultimate truth of India's freedom, the freedom movement, the struggles which went on for almost 200 plus years of foreign subjugation. We have moved far away from the fight. Today's generation, people like us have been born in a time where for us colonialism is a faraway concept. But the fight, the lifeblood and the sweat of our ancestors, of our leaders, that cannot be forgotten. That got crystallized in the Constitution. And that Constitution, given to us by our grandfathers, it crystallizes a nation's belief. The preamble where we say, we the people of India give to ourselves a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, is a promise. It's a covenant. And that is what the preamble embodies. It embodies all these aspects of liberty, equality and fraternity, the best of the distilled wisdom of mankind. So I think supplanting the Constitution would be equal to supplanting a historical truth. And it is not going to be an exercise which is, and I don't think any leadership would do that, because at the end of the day, every enlightened leadership understands the importance of equality. Because you cannot have a system which is unequal, which is asymmetric, and which is built in a manner in which people believe fundamentally that it is unjust. It will not last. It may last for a time. It may last on certain interpretations. It may last on certain, some linguistics and linguistic gymnastics. But it will not last for all times to come.
Yes. So my last question.
The Indian Constitution as well, the guiding spirit of liberty, equality and fraternity. And that ultimately is the antidote for any kind of narrow thinking or parochialism. And that remains the base for any thinking or any deep thinking to develop a nation beyond narrow restrictions. To take it to the next level, you have to have that kind of strength in your thinking.
Again, in one of his writings, Mar Gregorios says, a human kind of power is always a disciplined one. How relevant is this statement with respect to the family, society and religion?
It's an interesting question again, sir. See, I think when you look at discipline, or when you look at the word discipline and you look at the origin of discipline as a word and the way we understand discipline today. One is our colloquial understanding of discipline, where we look at it as a kind of a regimented lifestyle, a process through which you start creating a lifestyle and you lead that lifestyle in a certain manner. You could say that, I'm going to wake up at 4:30 in the morning, I'm going to do 1 hour of yoga, I'm going to do some reading, thinking and writing in some of the best hours in the morning. I'm going to start off, then I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. You regiment your life.
Kindly help us understand this statement, which is also in relation with the Bible, Holy Bible. The letter of the law kills, and the spirit of the law gives life. So how can we understand this statement in the present context?
Again, I have to kind of appreciate you for all your beautiful questions. See, Achaji, I think from the point of view of, it's not only a biblical truth, I would say that it is a universal truism. The letter of the law and the spirit of the law, we as lawyers, of course, distinguish it by calling it the black letter law tradition. A black letter law tradition means that you interpret the textual word, dehoard sometimes the context. So if it says that, thou shall not do this, that's it. But the spirit may say that you will not do this, but if you're faced with, say, clear and present danger, you are allowed to protect yourself. Could be the spirit of the law. whether a judge will interpret it based on the statutory code of the nation he sits in. But the law, this again, Acha, I'll just illustrate a small story. I don't want to take too much of your time, but one story which brings this beautifully, and that's Shakespeare's story about Shylock. Right? I mean, in Shylock, the so-called Jewish moneylender was supposed to get a pound of flesh in the absence of money being paid. So he decides to enforce this contract written in blood. So I have not given the money, so he has asked, Shylock has stated that if you're not able to pay the money, I think the Portia is a lady, I don't remember the characters today, but that pound of flesh is what you will give if you're not going to pay me the money. And I believe in this particular Shakespearean narrative, this beautiful piece of literature, I think the gentleman in question loses everything and he has no money to pay. This is a good question of letter of the law and the spirit of the law, because the contract says pound of flesh. It was interpreted at that time to say that yes, you can take your pound of flesh, but without spilling a drop of blood. Pound of flesh is the letter of the law. The spirit is the blood. Now you are allowed, as a judge I'm saying, okay, Acha, you can go ahead and get the pound of flesh. You will be punished at pain of death if you're going to spill blood. So that essentially brings, through the Shakespearean narrative, one of the eternal challenges of the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. You may be able to do certain things in law, but in practical reality, it is impossible to do it unless you're able to breathe into it the spirit of law. That breathing in of the spirit of the law, that essentially is what gives the law its strength. So whether it is a biblical truth or a universal truism or a cultural norm, ultimately any system of justice will require interpretations, which again goes back to those philosopher kings. So unless and until mankind is enlightened, you will continue to have mediocre men in positions of power. Now, I'm not saying that we are all great people, but when I say mediocrity, I'm saying that the element of knowledge, wisdom, justice, power, freedom, love, which you spoke about, it's an amalgamation of all these virtues which ultimately makes you capable of leading. Because leaders at the end of the day have to be capable of sacrificing and keeping themselves behind. They should not be the first person to take the fruits of their own labor. They should be the last. That kind of leadership requires, in my opinion, all these combination of virtues coming together. We as a nation, or any nation, would be blessed to be having leadership of that sort, which is something which we will all, every human being has to aspire to that leadership. And when I say not just in the nation, it could be your own family. You will be a lucky man if you have a father who embodies all these qualities. Or a teacher in a school where you go to, where your teacher embodies these qualities. Or you work in a place where your boss embodies these positive traits. You are a lucky man. Or you're married to a spouse, or you're in a family, or you're in a community, a society, in a company where these qualities are espoused, where it is not merely the letter of the law, but the leadership also believes in balancing the letter of the law with the right spirit. Otherwise, it becomes a dead letter law tradition to that extent. It has no meaning, no meaningful existence. So I think, Acha, first and foremost, congratulations to Shinu. I think for coming out with something of this nature, because I think at the end of the day, we all talk about doing things. Very few people walk the talk. I'm so happy to see Acha at such a young age you've taken such a beautiful initiative. And I understand almost 70 odd interviews have been done. So I can only understand, or I can only try and understand the quantum of work which you would have put into it. And the way you have been chasing me, Acha, I have to show that, that shows that your tenacity and your perseverance, I really appreciate that. But I think also the second factor, Acha, is the quality of your questions. I think, of course, you'd come to also interview a lawyer where, you also had that thing. But I think the questions were prescient, and they were deep, and they were very, very, how should I put it, they were framed in a manner which brings the best in people whom you question. I mean, those questions are framed in a manner in which I think any answer to those questions cannot be given in a pedestrian manner that requires its own thinking. So Acha, thank you secondly for those questions. And thirdly, Acha, I think also thanks is due on behalf of the entire Orthodox community, our Malangara Syrian Orthodox community. I think on behalf of all the people, especially the younger population who is spread across the world, who have probably no access to programs of this sort, or who don't even know the number of people who are there doing things. I think this is a great bridge. You're trying to bridge, I think, the divide which exists in terms of geographies, in terms of work profiles, in terms of the kind of economic strata breakdown which happens within our churches, where access again gets limited, the quantity of time gets limited. So Acha, I think all of these aspects, I think you have made this relevant to, I think, a youngster from the Orthodox Church sitting, say, as far as where is in New Jersey, or somebody sitting in Wayanad, or somebody who's a diaspora member, say, in the Middle East who's struggling hard. I think for everybody, I think you have brought in a powerful message of one of the most brilliant visionaries of the Orthodox Church, at least in contemporary history. And I think you've chosen, rightfully so, one of our most beloved saints and spiritual fathers from our church, and bringing him back into our mainstream thinking, I think is a brilliant initiative. And Acha, once again, thanks to you.
Thank you so much.